and welcome to Forget Fear, the tactics marketers need now. So if you're a marketer, fear has been your friend, and for good reason. Fear is one of the most powerful motivators of human behavior. As a matter of fact, social scientists and behavioral economists have identified something known as loss aversion. What they found is people are more motivated to avoid the pain of loss than they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. They're more motivated to avoid the pain of loss than they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. As a matter of fact, people feel losses twice as powerfully. So if you're in Vegas, you're playing the slot machine, let's say you win $100. Well, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, that'll feel like a 5, right? It's not $1,000,000, but it's $100. So on a scale of 1 to 10, it feels like a 5. If you lost that $100, it wouldn't feel like a -5. It would register as a -10 because people feel losses twice as powerfully as gains. And as a result, they're twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. So fear works. That's why marketers focus on it so much. We have the fear of missing out. Here we have a Gap ad, a Gap email, and they're saying, never miss a deal again. And then right in the body of their email, they talk about FOMO, fear of missing out. We also talk about the fear of running out. Here we have Jay Peterman, and they say, you better watch out. If you're holding out for this stuff to go on sale, don't. It probably won't be around that long. So they're basically saying, if you think you might want this, you better get it now, because if you wait and come back, you're probably going to be disappointed. Marketers also talk about the fear of being left out. So this is a screen grab for a private online shopping company called Beyond the Rack. And what they do is they take designer merchandise and they put it up at a really good discount for, about 48 hours. So right there, you've got to get in and get out, or you're going to miss out. You're going to feel left out. But in this particular case, there was another reason why I was feeling left out. You can see that they had 3 Coach bags for sale, but only 2 were available to me because the one on the left was reserved by others. So of course, which is the one that I wanted? I wanted the one everyone else had. I wanted the cool product, the in product, the most popular one. And because I couldn't get it, I was feeling left out. But they held out some hope. They said, reserved by others, check back in 12 minutes. Not 10 minutes, not 15 minutes, 12 minutes, very precise, very exact, because they know that if in 12 minutes, when I came back, one had miraculously become available, I would pounce on it so that I could be one of the cool kids. I could be part of the in crowd. I would no longer feel that I was left out. So clearly, fear works. The problem is, over the last year, COVID has introduced a very different, very new kind of fear that makes some of these others just pale in comparison. All of a sudden, we're literally fearful for our lives and our livelihoods. We're worried that we or someone we know might get sick, might even die. We're worried that we might lose our jobs, not have money for rent or mortgage, not have money for food. And against this backdrop, the fear of not having a cool product or of maybe missing a sale just doesn't seem all that scary. So right now, it's time for marketers to cool our relationship with fear, because right now it feels unethical and irresponsible for marketers to use fear. And if that's not enough to convince you, consider this. Social scientists have found that when people are really afraid, it saps their ability to pay attention and to make a good decision. As a matter of fact, when people are really afraid, they're less open to trying something new. So clearly, if we want to motivate human behavior now, fear is not the answer. Fortunately, social science provides some options that are. And while these are behavioral science principles that are normally very effective, I think they're going to be especially effective against the current backdrop. So let's take a look at 3 of them. We'll take a look at what they are, why they could be particularly effective, and how you can use them in market. So the first is something known as autonomy bias. And what social scientists have found is human beings have this deep-seated, hardwired, innate need to be in control of ourselves and our environments. We feel this need to be in charge. And of course, what's going on right now? People are feeling wildly out of control, right? We've got COVID-19 raging. We have no idea when it's going to go away. Every time we turn around, we're getting new information. As scientists learn new things, it's, don't wear a mask. Yes, wear a mask. No, wear two masks. Things are changing all the time. And even our regular routines, kind of the touchstones of our daily lives, the things we used to do without even thinking, well, those are right out the window, right? Our routines are gone. As a result, we're feeling wildly out of control, and we're craving the feeling of being in control even more. And again, as I said, this is a basic hardwired need. As a matter of fact, something really interesting happened in New York a number of years ago. In New York City, they decided to disable their walk buttons and move to an automated system. So what they would do is just periodically, the walk sign would go on. So it would say, don't walk, then it would cycle through and it would say walk. Then it would say, don't walk, then it would cycle through and it would say walk. And this was automatic. But it was very expensive to remove the buttons. So instead of removing them, for the most part, they just disabled them. And social scientists observed something very interesting. They found that when someone would walk up to one of these walk signs and press the button, they would be more likely to wait until the walk signal appeared, because they felt that their action had some impact on whether or not that walk sign was going to appear. So even though it didn't, even though the button had been disabled, they felt like they were in control. And as a result, it influenced their behavior. So let's look at how we can use autonomy bias in marketing. Here's an email, and right in the subject line, they say, do this now, create an income that puts you in charge. Now, there's a tremendous amount of psychological appeal in that subject line. People want to be in charge. They want to be in control. And then the email goes on to say, it means you'll have options when it comes to travel, adventure, even living abroad. And we like options, because if we have options, that means we can choose from among them. And that makes us feel like we have some kind of control. As a matter of fact, Tulane University ran a study, and what they found was people are 4 times more likely to make a buying decision in the moment if you give them a choice. So here we have Marriott Bonvoy, and their subject line says, you choose 2 great credit card offers. And then they offer you the boundless card or the bold card, and you get to make a choice. Now, if they only had one card, this is what would happen. Your decision would be, do I or do I not want a card? There'd be nothing to compare it to. There'd be no context. And so you'd say to yourself, maybe, I'll give it some thought. Perhaps I'll do some research. And then what happens? Well, you never get around to coming back to it. But by putting 2 options in front of you, it changes the question from, do I or do I not want a card, to which of these cards do I want? So as Tulane University researchers found, it can quadruple the likelihood you'll make a buying decision in the moment. Christopher Carpenter is a researcher at Western Illinois University, and he did some research into something known as the BYAF technique. The BYAF technique stands for but you are free, but you are free. What he found was, if you can tell someone what you want them to do, you can ask them to please do it, but if you remind them that they're the ones that are in charge, that the choice is theirs, that it's up to them, you can double the likelihood they'll do what you want them to do. So here we have WBUR, they're the NPR news station, and they say, they want you to renew your membership. They say, every dollar helps, and you can renew it whatever amount is comfortable for you. The choice is yours. So they're reminding you that the choice is yours, that you've got the decision-making power, that you're the one who's in control. And by doing that, you can actually double the likelihood people will do what you want them to do. Progress bars are another great way to make people feel they're in control. But you don't just want the progress bar. What you want to do is you want to tell people what's happening at each phase of the progress. Harvard University ran a study, and they found that when you do that, when you let people know what's happening as the progress bar progresses, people are happier. They report higher customer satisfaction. They have more satisfaction with the product and with the process. They don't even mind waiting as much. So here in this particular example, it's a company called People Smart. What they'll do is they'll let you enter a phone number and then tell you who it belongs to. So at the first phase, they tell you, okay, we've identified the carrier and the line type. Then they move to, the next phase of the progress. They say, oh, we've got the location and the zip code. And then they're approaching the end of the progress bar, and they say, all right, we're looking for the owner's name. And providing people that information gives them a sense of control, makes them feel that they're in charge. So it's a really good idea to show progress and to let people know what progress is happening as that progress bar progresses. So remember, make people feel in charge. People crave some kind of control, some autonomy, some agency over themselves and their surroundings, their environments. And here are some pro tips. Offer finite options. I told you the Tulane University found if you give people choices, it can quadruple the likelihood they'll respond. And you might say, well, why stop at 2 choices? Let's give them 10. And while, people might enjoy all the options, it's not a good idea, because what happens is choice overload sets in, or analysis paralysis. People are loving all the options, but they have a hard time choosing. And then some research shows that when they actually do choose, they have buyer's remorse. They're still wondering, did I make the right choice? Was that other one any better? So I would limit the options to 2, 3, 4. I wouldn't go any more than 5. But definitely 2 or 3 or 4, definitely better than 1. Make your options clear. If you're going to give people choices, they have to easily be able to tell what the differences are in the choices, or they're going to get confused, and that will stop them in their tracks. So make the options clear. And finally, you can use color, position, size to nudge people in the direction you want them to go in. So you're going to put a few choices in front of them, but there's probably one that you're hoping they'll choose. So there are things you can do to make it more likely that they do. You can put the choice you want them to take in the middle, because very often people take the middle option. Or you can make it a little bit larger, or put a different color around it to make it stand out. You're not taking the choice away from people. They're still in control. You're just nudging them in the direction you'd like them to go in. All right, our second behavioral science principle is something known as cognitive fluency. And cognitive fluency is a mouthful of a phrase that simply means people prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. We prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. We also judge those things to be more accurate, more truthful, and we feel more confident in our ability to make a decision about them. And that's what's so important to us as marketers, right? We want people to feel confident in their ability to make a decision, because then they'll make the decisions. And as marketers, we want people to make decisions, don't we? We want them to choose to engage with our content, to buy our product, to buy it again, to recommend it to a friend. We want people to make those decisions. So that means our messages need to be cognitively fluent. And there are kind of two halves to cognitive fluency. There's the words you choose in your marketing, and then there's the way you display them. Researchers at the University of Michigan ran a study. And what they did is they showed people a recipe about how to make a Japanese maki roll. And some people saw it in a very easy to read typeface like Arial, and other people saw it in a much harder to read typeface like Mistral, very ornate. And people read the recipe, one group or the other, same recipe. And then people were asked, how long do you think it would take to prepare the dish you just read about? Well, the people who read about it in the harder to read typeface, the more ornate, scripty one, the people who read about it in the harder to read typeface predicted it would take 59% longer to make that dish. Why? Because when something is hard to read, we think what we've just read about is hard to do. The difficulty reading transfers over, and we think that what we've just read about is going to be difficult to do. So now let's think about our current times, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. A lot of people are working from home. They're maybe at the same time trying to homeschool, maybe at the same time trying to do some home elder care. And while all this is going on, they've always got one ear or one eye tuned to the media, because we don't want to miss any breaking news. So as a result, people aren't really paying attention. They're paying less attention these days than they ever have. They're trying to multitask, which is virtually impossible to do. So what they're doing instead is paying continuous partial attention. They don't have a lot of bandwidth. They don't have large blocks of time or the ability to focus. And so that means now more than ever, it's important for us to make sure our marketing messages are cognitively fluent. So let's look at a few ways we can do that. One way you can do that is you can use numbers in your subject lines, numbers in your headlines. A number of studies have shown that a number in your subject line or in your headline can double the likelihood, can increase by double digits, I should say, can increase by double digits the likelihood that someone will open the email or click on the headline. Content Marketing Institute found that if you use an odd number, you've got a 20% better chance of getting somebody involved than using an even number. Although Harvard University found an exception to that rule, because they found that 10 and multiples of 10 do very well. And the reason, of course, is because we grew up counting on our fingers. So use a number, Even number, odd number, that's your choice, but use a number. The important thing to remember is use the numeral. Don't spell it out. Use the numeral. Don't spell out the number, because numerals stand out in a sea of letters, right? We're skimming, we're scanning, the number jumps out. And here's the other wonderful thing about numbers. The human brain craves ease and order, and numbers promise ease and order, right? You don't just say some steps to building a data-driven team. You say 3 steps. And when we see 3 steps, we understand what that means. It manages our expectations. We know what we're going to get. It's ordered. It's easy. Another way that you could be cognitively fluent with your marketing messages is to tap into something known as the Eaton-Rosen phenomenon. And here's how that works. Basically, you can have 2 sentences that say the same thing, but one of them rhymes and the other one doesn't. So here we have bike to school is cool. Well, that rhymes. Now, you could have also said bike to school is fun, bike to school is in, bike to school is popular. None of those rhyme. Well, people will judge the phrase that rhymes to be the more truthful, more accurate, more honest articulation of the idea. Why? Because rhyming phrases are easier for the human brain to process. And if something is easy for the brain to process, it feels right. And if something feels right, it's not a big leap to assume it is right. So we're marketers. We're not poets. We can't write all of our marketing copy in iambic pentameter, right? But what we should do is we should think about using rhyming phrases in key pieces of real estate, like a subject line, like a content title, like a headline, even a call to action, right? Don't delay, sign up today. Make that rhyme work for you. It's cognitively fluent. Here's another thing you need to think about in terms of cognitive fluency. Be very careful about reverse type, which is white type on a dark background. Also be careful about italicized type. Why? Both of these things are very hard to read. Some studies show that white type on a dark background is about 50% harder to read, right? It can cut your readership by about 50%. And then if you want to lose the rest of your readers, just italicize things. So am I telling you to never use reverse type? Am I telling you never to use italics? No. In small spots, they're fine. If you want to have, a headline, if you have a quotation that's pulled out, or maybe a subject line, sure, you can use italics, you can use reverse type. That can actually help call attention to it. But what you want to avoid is paragraph upon paragraph upon paragraph of reverse type or reversed italicized type, or even just plain old italicized type, because it's hard to read. This is a really interesting example. They're selling artificial Christmas trees, and what they're saying and the way they're saying it are literally at odds with each other, because they're saying it's remarkably easy to assemble, but because they've knocked out the type and they've italicized it, they're making it hard to read. And when something is hard to read, we assume it's hard to do. Final example here. This is from Princeton University. They ran a study where they wanted to look at the effect of stock names on stock prices. And here's what they found. Stocks with easier to pronounce names outperformed in the marketplace stocks with harder to pronounce names. And this held true even after they normalized the data to take into account how long a company had been in business or what industry it was in. But stocks that had easier to pronounce names outperformed in the marketplace stocks that had harder to pronounce names. So there's a dollars and cents argument for cognitive fluency. So remember, keep it simple. People prefer things that are easy to think about and easy to understand. And here are some pro tips. Don't use a 75-cent word when a 25-cent word will do. Keep your language simple. Avoid jargon, avoid acronyms, right? Avoid technical terms, long run-on sentences. Keep things simple. Also, make sure that your text is scannable. Have a lot of white space. Use bullets, subheads, numbers. Make sure you don't have really thick paragraphs. Keep your paragraphs short. Make your text, your copy, inviting. And here's the other thing. Consider anchoring large numbers to common items. And the reason for this is people have a problem with numerical cognition. There's another mouthful of a phrase, right? But what that means is we have a hard time getting our heads around large numbers, right? We don't have as much of a frame of reference for them. So if you're talking about like the annual price of something, you might want to break that down into the daily price. Say, the annual price is X. That's the cost of a cup of coffee every day. It's like 39 cents a day, less than the price of a cup of coffee every day. And people think, gee, I buy a cup of coffee 2 or 3 times a day. I don't even think about it. And it makes that price seem a lot smaller, a lot more manageable. Or maybe you're talking to New Yorkers about the number of people that are going to be affected by something, and you could say, this would fill Yankee Stadium 3 times. That's a frame of reference. If you happen to live in New York, you understand about how large like Yankee Stadium is and how many people it would hold, and suddenly a really large, almost incomprehensible number starts to make sense. So if you're trying to make things easy to understand, consider anchoring large numbers to common items. All right, our third and final behavioral science principle that's particularly effective right now is something known as social proof. And what social scientists have found is when people aren't sure what decision to make, when they're not sure what decision to make, they look to others, particularly others like themselves, and they follow their lead. So if we don't know what to do, we kind of look around, we see what other people are doing, and we say, well, I guess I'll do that. It makes us feel safer or more comfortable or more confident that we're making the right decision. As a matter of fact, there were some researchers in Columbia, South Carolina, who proved what a common decision-making shortcut social proof is. Here's what they did. They went out to this neighborhood and they posed as solicitors for a fictitious charity. So they'd walk up to somebody's porch, they'd ring the doorbell, somebody would come to the door, they would describe the charity, and then they would ask, would you like to make a donation? But here's where it gets interesting, because when they asked if someone would like to make a donation, they showed the list of people who had already donated. And what they found was the longer that list was, the more likely the person in front of them would be to donate. Right? So imagine you're the homeowner, right? Somebody's come to the door, 2 people, they seem really nice, but you don't know them. They describe a charity. It sounds like a good one, but you've never heard of it. You couldn't have because it was fictitious. And then they ask you to make a donation and you have to make a decision. And you see that there's a lot of people on that list, people from around here, even if you don't recognize their names. These 2 guys are on foot. They must be people from around here. And you think, all right, I guess I'll do it. People like me are doing it. Or you see very few names on the list and something inside you says, nah, I don't think I'm going to donate. So social proof is a very common decision-making shortcut. And right now, people are really relying on it, arguably more than ever. And the reason for this is we've never lived through a pandemic before. At least most of us haven't. We don't know what to do. We're being asked to make decisions that we have no frame of reference for, decisions, about behavior that we've never had to make before. And so as a result, we look around, we see what other people are doing, and we follow their lead. If everyone runs out and buys toilet paper, we run out and buy toilet paper. If people stop going to the grocery store and instead have their groceries delivered, that's what we do. If people start baking their own bread, suddenly we're baking our own bread. As a matter of fact, the British Journal of Psychology recently ran a research report that indicated the most important factor that determines whether or not people will wear a mask is whether or not their close friends and family members are wearing masks. This is even more important than what the individual may think about the efficacy of mask wearing. We literally do what the people around us are doing. Social proof is a very, very common decision-making shortcut. So how can we use that as marketers? Well, maybe you have a webinar platform that you're trying to sell, like GoToWebinar. They say millions of users trust GoToWebinar. And if you're looking to buy some kind of a webinar platform, you might think, well, all right, that's a safe choice. Millions of users are trusting them. Or we can also use social proof by bringing things a little closer to home. Here's Harvard Business Review. And they say what your colleagues are reading now. Discover what your peers are reading. So these days, there's so much content, it's really hard to consume it all. But if we could know what our colleagues, our peers were reading, that would be really helpful. We'd want to read what they're reading. Or here we have Wine Enthusiast Catalog, and they have 2 hits of social proof. They say this customer favorite is back in stock. So if it's a customer favorite, well, that's social proof. And if it's back in stock, that's another hit of social proof. Finally, testimonials are great ways to trigger social proof. And here's the reason why. Customers, they think to themselves, well, the company is going to say good things about their product or service, or I shouldn't say customers, I should say prospects are going to think to themselves, well, the company will say good things about the product or service that they're selling. Of course they will. It's theirs. So there's a little bit of, do I really believe them? But if a prospect could hear from that company's customer, well, that customer feels a little bit more like them. They're a little bit more believable. So here we've got a testimonial, and the person is saying, I hardly ever recommend any PPC agencies, any pay-per-click agencies, but these guys seriously impress me. And if you read that, you might think to yourself, I was wondering if this pay-per-click agency was any good. This guy seems to think so. And he also says he doesn't, run around endorsing just anybody. So it would probably make you feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more confident making that choice. So remember, Show your target that others have already done what you want them to do. And here are some pro tips. Use labels like most popular, best-selling, top choice. These are all indicators of social proof. So too is the phrase, customers like you also bought. And the other thing you might want to do is consider a testimonial from a skeptic, right? Testimonials are great. They're a wonderful form of social proof. But if you had a testimonial that said, Acme widgets are great, well, it's a good testimonial. But you could make it a great testimonial if instead it said, I used to think all widgets were the same. And then I tried Acme widgets. They're great, right? They're terrific. So if you start where that prospect is, which is a little bit of skepticism. Is it as good as the company says it is? Is it any better than my current solution? Is it any better than the other solutions I'm considering? Is it worth my time and effort to find out? Is it worth the extra price I might have to pay? These are all things people are wondering. And if you could start there and bring them along, it takes a good testimonial and turns it into a great testimonial, a much stronger form of social proof. So right now, at least, it's time for marketers to forget fear and use some other behavioral science principles, things like autonomy bias, cognitive fluency, and social proof, right? The idea of autonomy bias is we crave some kind of control over ourselves and our environments. Cognitive fluency, people prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. And social proof, we look to others and we follow their lead. If we use these behavioral science principles in our marketing, we will increase the likelihood that people will engage with and respond to our messages. So thank you very much. It's been great spending some time with you here at South by. And if anybody would like a cheat sheet that recaps these 3 ideas and adds in another 9 that will be good even after the pandemic is over, go to that URL. We'll send you out the PDF quickly. Again, thank you so much. It's been great to spend some time with you here at South by.